twice, and we've rebooted immediately, but YouTube has actually crashed twice. I think you're exactly on point, Andre. I think that's exactly right.
Yeah, but I mean, the recorded version, I think, will be perfect on the.
The recorded version's uploaded. It'll be made live straight after this.
Yeah.
But look, it doesn't matter. We could still hear what you were saying. I mean, it was a bit faint.
Yeah, 100%.
It got a bit louder.
It still was not good enough. It had to go slowly.
Okay. No, that's all right.
But look, it had to go.
As Andre said, the recorded version will be okay for those people.
Okay.
People.
So I still. Well, I mean, I'm a Luddite, and I love complaining about tech, but I still do have a few questions that I'd like to kind of throw towards other Nick. Yeah. The first question is, it seems, and I think Koile Katsian kind of sent in a message on the chat where, referencing kind of super recent research that's simulating stem cells from skin cells and other cells. So they're creating those basic stem cells probably now, and I think as technology goes, it'll synthesize stem cells not from other cells. But does that negate the point that the research where the medicine evolves from is still based in? So if the research is still based in the destruction of embryos, but the medicine that's created, let's say 10, 15, 20 years later, is not utilizing embryos, are we still in the same moral dilemma?
Okay. What Koile Katsian mentioned, he's referring to adult stem cells. That's skin cells and any other cell. And that is not a problem. However, from the experimental point of view, these adult cells, they don't perform anywhere near as well, and they're very, very restricted in what they can do. They use adult stem cells in bone marrow, and there's 1 or 2 blood areas. They simply don't multiply, you can't get enough of them, and they are not as clean, nor do they perform as well as embryonic cells. An embryonic cell is capable of being artificially manipulated and coaxed into becoming a heart cell. So the scientists do that by themselves in the laboratory. They say, this embryo will become a heart cell. This one will become a neuron. This one will become an elbow. Not true. But so the clean embryonic cells, they perform very well, especially compared to adult. The adult scenario, even if you project into the future, there's nothing like that indicates that they will ever compete with embryonic cells. So they'll be, if anything, they'll be working in parallel. But even the latest research suggests that there's no competition. And so they, look, I'm sort of guessing on the run here. If you have a blastocyst with 150 embryos after 5 days, then they pull those apart, and it's like an assembly line. And each one of those can potentially produce another 150 and another 150. And so in a very quick period of time, you can have literally thousands, millions of embryos which are ready to do any kind of experiment with. And so these are actual embryos that are killed. With adult stem cells, that is not a problem. You can go to your heart's content, but they don't have the ability to do what embryos do. So the closest they've come at the moment is, I forgot the word. Look, it escapes me. It's an adult stem cell that's made to replicate or at least simulate an embryonic cell. it's meant to do that, but it's still very, very restricted. And it's not clear when they say that it simulates an embryonic cell. It's not clear whether you can actually grab that simulated cell, put it in a worm, and it'll give birth. If it does, then you're back to square one. You've got the same problem, because then it's still a genuine embryonic cell made from an adult cell. But that is absolutely right. As of now, even, that's not been clarified. They just say it simulates to some extent. So it's not a true embryo. We're only concerned with true embryonic cells, because these are genuine individual cells. They've got individual souls. And if they grow to fruition, they're born. And so it's not the same, nowhere near the same thing. If they could, they would go adult. It doesn't work.
Okay. All right. And so the next question.
Hang on. Gee, look, it's tripped my tongue. Doesn't matter. I was going to go there in between cell. Polypleural something. Doesn't matter. Keep going. Okay.
Okay, so the next question is probably slightly more difficult in terms of why is the church not commenting on these types of technologies?
It's not more difficult. It's that the church is stuck in the past. Now, that's not to say that the past is wrong. It is not wrong. It's just that after 2,000 years, the enemy of the church, and really you're talking base level, is demonic activity, and it goes upwards. The enemy of the church for 2,000 years has tried to attack the church's teachings. So the church believes. This is what we started this whole series on, the creed. This is what we believe. And they basically got nowhere. So now they're trying to eliminate God. The serious atheist scientists, they know that can't be done. They actually acknowledge that. Even the world famous atheist Richard Dawkins says he can't do that. And so, and no matter how many references I go through, and I go through daily, not dozens, but a lot, every single day, different experts being interviewed. And every one of them say there's only two options. There's either a creator, or you have got no option but to go down to one version of a multiverse. And by an invented definition is that the multiverse is infinite. If it's not infinite, no, the problem goes back to square one. If it's infinite, then they say, well, then you will have an infinite number of universes, and therefore, because there's an infinite number, then by pure chance, statistically, you'll come across a universe that's got the right conditions for life, like our universe has. And this is just so precise. Or even the atheist scientists point out that precision is just so phenomenal that it's just literally crazy to even pretend that it has occurred by accident. So they have to get around a God that they can't destroy. And so they come up with a fictitious scenario of multiverses. But the problem with multiverses is, by definition, they are beyond contact. You can never see them. You can never see their influence on our universe. You can't measure anything. It's simply a fictitious invention. It's not even a hypothesis. It's at best a word used by scientists called conjecture. If you can't see, hear, measure, feel, taste, touch, then it's a pretend scenario. And they then jump on the bandwagon and say, well, mathematically we can come up with a multiverse theory. Already, every single year, there are thousands of new theories of multiverse. Thousands. And why? What does that mean? Say you had it 1,000 only. That means there can only be one that's right, so that's 999 are wrong, by definition. And this just goes on and on and on. They can't get anywhere. It's just a big fat schmozzle. And so it's an attack, going back, it's an attack on God, trying to make him irrelevant. by a fictitious creation of multiverses, which by definition are not scientific. That's where we stand now. So it's a belief system.
Mm-hmm.
The church is a belief system. And the church, in its seminaries and worldwide, where it teaches, the church understands that everything to date for 2,000 years is correct. And it is correct. It can't be changed. But there's a new rung in the ladder that's been inserted. That rung has to be overcome. And that rung is atheism pretending to be scientific. Once it can be negated, then you get back on track and you keep continuing along the lines of conventional theology. But yes, conventional theology can't ignore the attack on the church. And the seminaries and the institutions for teaching future priests, they are not, they don't understand this. That's just never been part of the story. Yet, ironically, you go back to, 400 AD when you had St. Basil and St. Gregory the theologian and John Chrysostom and other big theologians, and they were emphatic that science is God's work. And it's not just there to glorify God, it's how God talks. I once earlier mentioned, I think it might have been during this series, where, for example, if God allowed Moses to understand DNA, what would be the point of that? What's the point of Moses telling people of his era that there's this thing called DNA that works on our bodies? And I said, well, what on earth is that? Why should we know this? What does it mean? It doesn't mean anything. In fact, at that particular era, there was a big controversy amongst saints themselves about when does an embryo come to life. And again, John Chrysostom said at the time of conception, but other saints said no. This is when the mother feels the baby kicking. So even that fundamental level of knowledge, God did not reveal to the saints themselves. It was premature. It was like Adam. Adam, when he ate from the tree of knowledge, it's not that God wanted to hide something from him. He was not ready. Adam was not ready. He was not mature enough. It wasn't appropriate for him to know that knowledge at that point in time. So as life goes on, as people get more mature, they come closer to God, understand God's creation, then they are in a position to learn a little bit more, and it goes on and on. So the church somehow has come to a grinding halt, not understanding this, that our children, our youth, are now exposed to an era of knowledge that never existed before. And so because it didn't exist before, it was not taught before in seminaries. And so because it wasn't taught before, it's not taught now. And so whenever I have these discussions with clergy, there's a handful. Father Nicholas Krupov understands. He's got technical background. Father Gabriel understands. Father, there's a number of clergy in our diocese who understand. But most of them don't. And so they think crazy Father Nick D is on his doing his dopey stuff about science. And meanwhile, they are the very well sane people who would go and bless their parishioner to have them grandmother's Parkinson's somewhat reduced in intensity, and let's kill 8,000 people, or 8,000 million people. It's just ridiculous. And so it's about time that the church itself understood the new era that we're in, and they have to explain to their children that, hang on, what you're being told is fictitious, and that you have to understand where the error is, and you have to explain to them using the same language that they learned at university. You have to use what we're talking about now. If you don't do that, then our kids who are brought up in the church every week having communion, in the end they've been intellectually confused and told otherwise, and then they abandon. And you may recall, I don't know, two lectures ago where I showed a graph, and you saw like 10 years ago, it was somewhere around 60% of the people confessed during the census that they were Christians. Now it's just touching the 50% line, and the youth are in the 38% band. And the next year's next census, and I'll make you a bet that there'll be about 30% maximum that will say that I believe in God. And that means 70% have gone down the drain. And so what do the priests do about it? They say, let's go and talk about the Old Testament, for goodness sake. You know, it's just nonsense. And this is the one mission in life I think I have, is to at least make people wake up to themselves and not see their own children destroyed. I get a bit sort of fired up here, but that's the reason.
No, absolutely. Yeah. It's the battleground. So okay, so I'm going to bring one more question in that I think should bring in both the Father Nicks at the same time, because it kind of touches on the science as well of the statement of man being created in the image and likeness of God.
Right.
So but at the same time, our understanding of God as an entity he's not a physical presence. He's not the old man with the white beard. So how does image and likeness get broken down?
Okay, all right. Now, God being infinite, it cannot be seen by finite mind, no matter how big the finite mind is, including the angels. However, God had an obligation to prove his existence to humankind, to mankind, because until he did that, you recall in the Gospels, Christ said they would not have sinned. And so God then came down as man. So all of a sudden, you have infinity becoming finite, where it can be seen. And so, okay, you see Jesus now. So how would you, what would make you, I'm being generic here, what would make a person believe that Jesus is God-like or God? He clearly has to be able to do supernatural things. If he did only natural things, then he's no different to you and me. And so no one would expect him to be God. He'd be just some sort of crazy man walking around saying, I can raise people from the dead, but I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to say that. It doesn't work. So by definition, God has to reveal his presence in a supernatural way, meaning that he is over and above nature. And this is exactly what Jesus did. He showed that nature obeyed him no matter what he did. And it wasn't just occasionally obeyed him, it obeyed him 100% of the time. Whatever Jesus said, that's what happened. So when the laws of nature obey Jesus, that means he's beyond nature. He's more powerful than nature. And he demonstrated that through miracles. Earlier, I think in my very first lecture in this area, I pointed out that it's very easy for people to dismiss miracles as saying, oh, well, that's a fantasy. But that's not true. In fact, a couple of things I pointed out then was that for something to be scientifically correct, it has to be repeatable. It has to be observed by more than one person. The actual number of people hasn't been quantified. When you look at astronomers and they see an event that happens, a supernova exploding, it might take from days to weeks, then it vanishes. You might have had half a dozen or a dozen astronomers seeing that event. Now, that doesn't make it non-scientific just because half a dozen saw that. The fact that they saw it, that's what makes it real. That is the proof. And so earlier back, I pointed out that when those people who witnessed Christ's miracles, that's equivalent proof. People saw Christ doing supernatural things, doing things that's not part of ordinary nature. It's no different. So the fact that it happened 2,000 years ago is irrelevant because science does not depend on time in that context. So whether it happens today, supernovas happened billions of years ago. That's still scientifically valid.
Mm.
So Christ's miracles pass that test. They also pass the test that when you perform a scientific experiment, for example, whether it's here, whether it's in China, whether it's on Mars, on the Moon, or anywhere else, it's space irrelevant. It's time irrelevant and space irrelevant. So again, the fact that it happened 2,000 years ago doesn't make it a non-supernatural event. It was seen, and it complies with all definitions of science. And so God had to do that. He had to show physically for human beings to see him do stuff that nobody else can do, and it complies with scientific definition. So God proved that he is in charge. Now, next bit is, if you may recall earlier back when I had that chart, God at the top, mankind in the middle, and below mankind was the animal kingdom and the universe in general, the created universe. So how do we show that humanity affects nature, that the laws of nature obey? And I gave, I think it might have been last lecture, where I showed how electrons spin one way or the other all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, they appear in multiple places at the same time, but like not physical things, like ghost things. As soon as human beings observe them, they become real. One, not many, becomes one electron. Spinning all sorts of ways, all of a sudden spins one way and only one way because it was observed by a human being. So that means at the microscopic level, human beings affect, nature obeys us at the microscopic level. I was going to go on this occasion, give another talk at, again, microscopic level. I'll leave that for another time. It's a little bit more complex, still understandable, but my aim is in fact to go macroscopic. And I'll talk about the holy fire, where atheists can observe that, and that makes predictions, because you can actually look at the calendar, the church calendar, and say, okay, on this year, that's when Easter will occur, and it's a movable feast. And the day before Easter, Easter Saturday, you will see and experience the holy fire at Christ's tomb. And this, whether you're a believer or not believer, you will experience what that fire does. Likewise, during Theophany, there are lots of actual video clips, I'll show those later, where the River Jordan flows for, 2,000 kilometres in one direction. Then you have Greeks on one side, clergy with people, another bunch of Greeks with their bishops on this side, and the river's flowing. You can see the branches flowing down the river, and the priest or the bishop throws a wooden cross into the water, and the other guy at the other end throws a cross in the water, and all of a sudden the water starts to bubble, the river bubbles, and it flows the other way. So, and atheists can see this, and the prediction is that you can say when it'll happen each year. So it complies with every criteria of science. So we're going from microscopic to macroscopic, and you're showing either level that nature is obedient to us. And the only way that can be is if we are made in God's image. So God creates the nature then obeys us. And this is what I've been doing, showing little experimental evidence of this. Then I thought, enough's enough. Today I've got to do a U-turn and show why it's important. It's not just something nice to know. It's to save your soul, your children's souls, their children's souls onwards. It's a big deal. And so there's tons of this stuff for us to cover. And I'm sort of doing this in little doses. And my biggest problem is to try to make it understandable by, as I said earlier, by people who would have done high school maximum and still work our way through, so it doesn't overwhelm them. That's my goal. So in other words, God has proved his existence.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that it's been dismissed, it's not a scientific dismissal. It's just nonsense. It's just, they have no option. Okay.
Passionate. Good.
Yeah.
Well, passionate
All right,
priests is what we need, of course. Father Nick, Kay. Seems to be. Wait, watch. He's muted. Alright,
I'm unmuted now.
you're unmuted.
Yeah. Well, first of all, what I'd like to add to what you were saying about, Holy Father's opinions about when life begins and that. Theology points out that in liturgical theology, we have several occasions when there are feasts dedicated to conceptions. First of all, there's Annunciation, the conception, the incarnation of Christ himself. Theology teaches that Christ is not only God, but man from the first day, from the day when the Holy Spirit comes and the Virgin Mary becomes the Mother of God. Now, there's also, the Church celebrates her conception and the conception of St. John the Baptist. Why would we celebrate these days of conceptions if these people were not persons or human beings from the first day? So I think indirectly that answers the questions already in the practice of the Church, right? Now, with regard to, I'd like to, the question was asked about the image and likeness. I'd just like to say a few words about the distinction between those two terms. The image of God and Father Miko has pointed out, especially from a very tangible and scientific point of view, how the image of God within us, within Christ, is translated into our ability to affect natural processes.
Oh no. We've lost him again. Oh, Brunswick.
I think there are little teeny-weeny demons actually with screwdrivers.
Yeah, probably.
Fiddling around.
Oh, Brunswick's full of them. They all order double shot lattes as well.
Yeah. Oh dear. Okay, well, Father Nick's sort of meditating or something. When you can start working again, Father Nick, interrupt. When I spoke about the saints trying to work out when conception occurred, that was not the fact that these people were born and so implicitly they were alive when they were in the womb. There's no question about that. But the saints wanted to find out exactly when that happened, when the soul joined the little embryo. And so they were interested in the technical process already then. But the technical process is not something to do with salvation. It's just gaining more and more knowledge with time. And so because it was a process of gaining knowledge, God had to allowed that to occur gradually. As people matured, they learned more and more and more. And it's taken thousands of years to get where we are. So it's nothing to do with salvation, that bit of knowledge, but it's important.
Yeah.
And so the saints wanted us still to know this. You might recall, in particular, I enjoyed reading St. Gregory, the theologian, when he's speaking to his sister Macrina, St. Macrina, and they spent an awful lot of time trying to work out at Christ's second coming, how will the soul find its own little molecules? They didn't use the word molecules in that time, but that's what they meant, because the body has dissolved into the ground, possibly washed away by the river, And so they were not debating this, commenting, discussing this, trying to work out why.
Yeah.
So that this was just an area. Okay, Father Nick, back to you.
Back.
I'm sorry, my Wi-Fi tonight, because I've got 29 other apartments here. It's a prime time. Everybody's using Wi-Fi.
They're all complaining about Dan Andrews. It's all right. It's it's
That's permissible.
yeah.
So I just, if this Wi-Fi permits me, I'd like to say that, point out the difference between those words, those concepts, image and likeness. And Holy Fathers explained that image refers to those stable and indestructible aspects of our blueprint from God, what we are supposed to be like. And the perfect perfect human being, of course, is Christ. He is the fulfillment, the absolute likeness of that image, because, well, he is the Son of God himself, creating a new a person, or rather taking in humanity into his personhood. So everybody has those aspects that baptism gives us the opportunity to feel with our conscience, should we take up the mission of developing our conscience, to see what this image, what this blueprint is. And, if we read the gospel, we understand who we are supposed to be, because we're supposed to be, we have similarity to Christ. So the likeness is, if the image is a static presence of God's stamp, God's blueprint within us that has all of these aspects, like what Father Nicholas said about the creativity, us being like the Creator, our possession of the free will, our ability in connection to God to have this loving power, and all sorts of other things. But our likeness is really a function of what we do ourselves, how we respond. I was saying today about the two economies, the economy of Christ in putting together and healing human nature, and the economy of the Holy Spirit, how the Holy Spirit indicates, points out to us, points out to our conscience what our specific personal path in our journey towards the bosom of the Father is about. And so as we move along this journey, this is when we are increasing in our likeness. That's a dynamic aspect in terms of our participation. And this is why the ascetic saints are called by a word that refers to the likeness. They are the ones who have developed that, like they're most like prepodobne, osii, okay, in God. So they developed their likeness of God. They've moved along, led by the Holy Spirit. All right, that might be enough. Just a few words.
Yeah, I agree with everything with that. Absolutely.
Otherwise, it would have been rather awkward. All right, so I think, well, it's past 8:30. I think that's probably it.
We'll night, and I'll just say the prayer.
Again, before we do that, because I missed parts, Is there anything that you could not understand because of the jerkiness of that video clip that perhaps I could answer right now? Or are you able-
Well, I don't, because I've been watching it as there's like whatever 6 or 8 of us that have been watching it on the Zoom, and I don't know if it's different on the YouTube channel than
okay.
it is on this. So I think if there are problems, if there are extra questions, they'll come through from the YouTube thing. I'll go tomorrow. I'm just going to rewatch the whole stream through the YouTube and see see what it
I
is.
don't think it was a problem to understand. I don't think
Yeah.
it was.
It wasn't a problem. Like I got the general gist. The sound dropped out for a bit, but the full. I'm going to rewatch it tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't a problem.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Right. It is truly meet to bless thee, Theotokos, ever blessed and most pure, the Mother of our God. More honourable than the cherubim, the Yonkapim, more glorious than the seraphim, without corruption, thy games birth to God, the true Theotokos. We do.
Amen.
Thank you all.
Good to see your faces.
To the team, to Andre and Chris, who's invisible at the moment, and to Father Nicholas for his great presentation, another scientific instrument.
There
And
he
so,
is.
God willing, we'll see you in a fortnight's time.
In the coffee shop.
Okay.
Unless we're out of lockdown, and then I will be fishing in the bush somewhere, and you will not see me at all.
All right. We'll have you streaming from the bush.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
From your campfire.
My campfire, correct. All right. Good night, everybody.
Right. Good night.
Bye.
Good night.